Now it is time for Stat Sports on the home of the Great Danes, WCDB Albany 90.9 FM and WCDBFM.com. Here's your host, Rob Eppelstadt.
And we are back here on Stat Sports. Joining me now on the WCDB hotline is Anish Shroff, studio host, anchor, and play-by-play broadcaster for ESPN, including, of course, the lead play-by-play voice for ESPN's men's college lacrosse coverage. UAlbany men's lacrosse started their 2018 season with a 15-3 win over Syracuse at the Carrier Dome over the weekend. The fewest goals the Orange have scored in a game since 1991. Very excited to have Anish on the show to help us break it all down and get to know more about him and his time at ESPN. Anish, how are you this morning?
What's going on, fellas? How are you?
Doing very well. Very happy to have you on the show, obviously. So let's get right into it. So obviously, you've been on the UAlbany men's lacrosse bandwagon for a while now. You had said previously that the Great Danes have been your number one team in the nation since last summer. The Danes officially ranked second in the nation now behind Duke in the latest Inside Lacrosse poll after Saturday's statement win. Just why in your mind is UAlbany lacrosse the best team in the country?
Hey, look at what they have coming back. I saw them in the quarterfinals last year against Maryland, and just thought they had a brutal draw, to be honest with you. I thought the 8th seed was a joke. To get North Carolina, the defending champion, in the first round was not exactly a favorable matchup, and they end up winning that game. And then you play Maryland, which was the best team, and then certainly Albany was not the 8th best team in the field. So I remember walking away from that game, and I'm thinking, okay, you've got a young freshman stud at the face-off X, something that prior to last year, Scott Marr hasn't had. You put T.D. Erlin on the Lyle Thompson teams, you're talking about a team that's probably been to championship weekend twice. I mean, that was the missing piece. They have that. I think defensively, they've improved so much over the years, just a better goaltending, better close defenders, more athletic guys. The midfield depth was a little bit of a concern, but then I looked at the attack with Fields, with Ray, and then you're bringing in not just the number one player out of high school in Tehoka, Nanticoke. You're bringing in a guy who I believe is going to be a transcendent player in college lacrosse. I'm not saying he's going to be the next Lyle Thompson. They have different styles and different builds. But to me, this is a generational talent. You put him with Connor Fields, who's arguably the best attackman in college lacrosse right now. You're going to have the possession advantage with T.D. Erlin. To me, all the pieces fit. The question is now, can they just get over that psychological barrier and break through to championship weekend? To me, this is the best team that Scott Marr has had. Again, the Thompsons, as good as they were, they didn't have that face-off guy, and they were often at a possession disadvantage. So when you put all the pieces together, this is Scott Marr's best team. I think it's the best team in the country.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, Anish, because obviously I find it so interesting because in years past it seems like UAlbany men's lacrosse is always disrespected and people don't necessarily believe in this team. Just why do you think that has been over the past couple of years, that people don't necessarily give respect to UAlbany that they deserve?
They haven't been to championship weekend. And you look at the history of college lacrosse prior to this decade, there were only, I think, 7 teams that had won a championship. And for a long time, the sport was dominated by just the same teams. It was the Syracuses. It was the Hopkins. In the 90s and the early 2000s, it was Princeton. You had Virginia. There haven't been a lot of new teams, so to speak, really break through and have the kind of sustained success that you need to sort of be a mainstay. And so, I kind of laugh when I look at some of these preseason rankings because – so many times people just default to the name brands, and Albany isn't a name brand. I think if you get to championship weekend, that is the first step in changing perception.
So obviously the Great Danes have had so much success under head coach Scott Marr. His 18th season with UAlbany. You talk about how you think this is the best team they've ever had. Just obviously they've had many special teams in this program over the years. Just what makes this 2018 team different than any other that Albany's had?
Well, I think, they've had a taste of it now, right? They saw how close they were when they had the Thompsons. Ty Thompson has a shot at the end of regulation against Notre Dame that hits the goalie in the helmet. If that shot goes in, Albany gets to championship weekend. The following year, they had Notre Dame again on the ropes and just weren't able to, to withstand that ride. And to me, T.D. Erlin is the X factor. Fields, Nanticoke, Ray, as good as the offense is, you got to get them the ball. And I remember watching the first half of that Syracuse game. I don't think Syracuse is that good this year, but to beat that team in the Carrier Dome 15-3, the way Albany did, the first half, Damandata made some great saves for Syracuse to keep that a 4-1 game. And essentially, it felt like Albany was on offense the entire game. And that's what a guy like T.D. Erlin can do. I mean, you watch Denver, Trevor Baptiste, when you have a face-off guy, you can tilt the possession advantage to your side. It changes everything. And they have a great offense, and you're giving that offense the ball more times than the opponents will have it. To me, that's a game changer. If you have T.D. Erlin when the Thompsons were playing again, they've got easily a couple of trips to championship weekend and maybe even a national title. I think that position is so crucial, and Scott Marr finally got the right guy. I mean, that's the difference in a nutshell.
Of course, Erwin has been so dominant, such a huge factor for the UAlbany Great Danes men's lacrosse team. Let's talk about Tehoka Nanticoke, of course, the #1 recruit in the nation coming into the season. Starts off his college career, 5 goals in the Carrier Dome versus Syracuse, leading all scores for the Danes. Just what makes Tehoka Nanticoke such a unique talent?
Well, a number of things. You start with his size. He's built like a triceratops. and when he comes charging down, there's very few guys that can stay with him. Then you look at the stick skills. Everyone's seen that clip on YouTube where during a live game, one hand between the legs, and, oh, by the way, that's his offhand. He's a righty. So he shoots that with his left hand. So the stick skills are just impeccable, next level stick skills. Then it's his lacrosse IQ, knowing where to be, knowing the right place, just the feel for the game. And I think you see this in a lot of Native American players. There's almost that sixth sense because, I equate it to, the Willie Mays playing stickball in the street. There is kind of a little bit of that, I would call it street ball edge, because these guys, again, played a form of the game that's very blue collar, and it's played in the backyard and the pickup games on the res. Man, I mean, if you talk to Lyle Thompson and some of the natives, those can get intense, but that's where you kind of figure out who you are, and that's where all the backyard tricks come into play. So he has all of those qualities, and then you pair him up with Connor Fields.
Oh, baby,
he's playing with one of the best players in the nation. So you want to focus your attention on Tehoka, well, then, Connor Fields can go for 5 and 3. So I think when you factor all that in, and oh, by the way, Justin Ray's a great outside shooter. So he's the right guy at the right time for this team. But I think, he reminds me a little bit of Dylan Malloy, but he's actually faster and he's got better stick skills, which is, again, a scary thought. A guy for his size, he can move, he can bully you, he can bulldog you. He can swim past you. And again, he's able to maneuver through double and triple teams because his stick skills are so incredible. And again, I think playing with Connor Fields to begin your career, he'll score 50 goals in his sleep this year.
Anish Shroff, studio host, anchor, and play-by-play broadcaster for ESPN here with us on Stat Sports. So obviously the comparisons are going to be made between Tehoka Nanticoke and Lyle Thompson, both Native Americans, both playing for UAlbany. Lyle Thompson, of course, regarded as the greatest college lacrosse player of all time by so many. He even tweets out that he thinks Tehoka is going to break his career scoring record one day. It's obviously so early on, but from what you've seen, everything you've read, just how do you compare Tehoka Nanticoke to the GOAT in Lyle Thompson?
Well, I wouldn't. I put Lyle Thompson on Rushmore. I was in college when Mikey Powell played, and then Gary Gate.
Okay.
So those guys would certainly have a hand in that argument. But listen, to me, Lyle's on the Rushmore of college players. I think they're different players. Lyle, the one thing that was deceptive about Lyle was his strength. Great forearms where I don't think people ever realized how strong he was because he had such a wiry build. Tehoka, you look at Tehoka, and he looks, like I said, he looks like a triceratops. I mean,
you don't mistake anything with him.
Right, exactly. I mean, there's nothing subtle about his build, but they're different kind of players. Tehoka is not the prototypical ex-attackman the way Lyle was. Lyle's a better passer, but again, through people that I've talked to, the one thing that I had heard before this season was that Tehoka, as a high school senior was more advanced than Lyle Thompson. And I think Tehoka is going to have a better freshman season than Lyle did. Remember, Lyle is a freshman. They really didn't know where to use him. He played some attack. He played some midfield. He even took some faceoffs. Lyle didn't really start to come into his own until his sophomore year. I think with Tehoka, there's a little bit more of a defined role for him early in his career. They're different players, but I think they're both generational players. And Lyle certainly was transcendent, and I think Tehoka's got a chance to be as well.
Here with Anish Shroff, here with us on Stat Sports. So I want to move a little bit to more about you and your career at ESPN. Obviously, you think about ESPN, and it's a place that so many people dream of working for one day. It's a place where, many people believe once you work for ESPN, you can feel as if you've really made it in the sports media world. Anish, you've been with ESPN, of course, since 2008. Just how would you describe the whole experience of working at a place like ESPN?
It's incredible, man. It's obviously it's challenging, but I think it's a challenge everybody embraces. You're constantly pushed to your creative limits and trying to find new ways to tell stories and deliver a message and deliver a story. And you work with some of the best people, which I only think makes you better. We talk about Tehoka, playing on Albany. I mean, I remember I was a young buck when I started there, and all of a sudden, you're working with people who have, got an office full of Emmy Awards, and my cubicle is right across from Bob Lee's office, and getting a chance to pick his brain, and we went to the same high school, so we had that connection. Was pretty cool, and then you get to kind of, it's sort of a master class, and you get to see how some of the best people in the business go about their business and do their work. And I think the biggest thing is there's just such a great buy-in from so many people. Everybody wants to tell a story, tell it the right way, and so I think just being in that cauldron, just by osmosis, you just kind of become better at your craft.
Yeah, and you mentioned about, obviously, the stories of everyone who works. And I find your story, in a way, so interesting because, of course, back in 2004, you were one of the 3 finalists on ESPN's second season of their reality show, Dream Job, where the goal of the show was to find a new anchor for SportsCenter. Now, although you didn't win, you still ended up at ESPN a few years later. Just looking back at that whole experience now, just what was that whole experience like?
I tell people it was still a TV show. It was still a TV show. You're never as good as you think you are. You're never as bad as you think you are. There's a lot of things in it that is very much like a reality TV show. And in hindsight, for me, it was a great experience. And to be honest with you, had I won, I don't think I would have lasted. I don't think I was ready at 21, 22. So it was kind of nice to just get a taste of it and then go get some seasoning and local news and then, kind of know. I mean, I think the biggest thing that helped me was knowing what was going to be expected should I ever have another opportunity to go there. Kind of knowing the demands of that job and knowing, how sharp you have to be, what you have to bone up on, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, and how to get better. And so, my goal sort of after that was, to be honest with you, it was a little bit of relief that I didn't win. And I said, okay, I can go start this thing and kind of have a little bit of a taste. And that kind of drives you, and you have the hunger now. Okay, one day I want to get back to that level.
How much do you think, being on the show really helped you? Because in a way, as you were mentioning, you kind of already knew what it was going to take to work for a place like ESPN.
Well, I think from a networking standpoint, certainly it was huge. You meet people, and Al Jaffe, who used to hire the talent, was one of the judges, and he never voted me off on any of the shows. So
that's always good.
So I kind of knew, okay, well, Al might like me, and he did say keep in touch, and we did. And so I would, essentially the way I got the job, I had been hired at a local affiliate in Syracuse, and I'd been in Syracuse for maybe 3 months. And, Al and I had traded emails a few times, since the show, and I would send him some work, and he would give me some feedback. And, the last time before, so I'd sent him some work before I'd started in Syracuse, maybe, 6 months before. And he kind of said, hey, keep doing your thing. You're getting better. Gave me some good feedback. And he says, I really like this. Work on this. I really like this. But he goes, I really like what I'm seeing. So I was like, great. So I think I was at Syracuse for about 3 months, and I just said, hey, just started a new job. Just wanted to let you know. And, I was hoping if I can send you an air check, if you don't mind giving me feedback. And his response was, hey, we may have some openings coming up here in a few months. I think you might be ready. how about you just send me your next sportscast and we'll go from there. And I was like, whoa, this is kind of like an audition. And so I remember I was anchoring the 11 o'clock sports that night, and I think I probably, got into the office about 11 a.m., crafted every word, made sure it was buttoned up and it was well-written and creative, FedExed it the next morning. About a week later, I get an email from Al, hey, we liked your sportscast. We want to bring you in for an interview and an audition. And then the ball kind of got rolling, and then they offered me the job, and then I was able to work it out with my station to let me out of my contract. And, I ended up being in Syracuse for all of 6 months, and literally New Year's Eve, 2007, I packed up my car and drove through a snowstorm from Syracuse, New York to Connecticut, and then started the next day, started on January 2nd. So, it's you kind of never know, but, obviously I think having those contacts and knowing Al certainly helped. And again, knowing what they were looking for, I think also helped.
Anish Shroff of ESPN here with us on Stat Sports. Final thing before we let you go, we really do appreciate the time. So obviously the breaking news taking over the college basketball world this week as the NCAA denies Louisville's appeal of the penalties brought on them stemming from those allegations involving a former staff member with the program during 2011 to 2015. Just what was your first reaction when you heard that Louisville would be forced to vacate all those wins and that 2013 national championship?
Yeah, I think vacating wins, to be honest, is silly. It happened. I mean, unless you have one of those Men in Black memory erasing devices, I don't know what you gain from there. I mean, those guys still have their championship rings. Nobody's taken that back. You want to take down the banner, fine. I mean, it happened. We saw it. You go on YouTube, 2013, one shining moment. It still exists. It still lives. For Louisville, I think the bigger picture here is this is just the tip of the iceberg. Everyone seems to forget, this that came down the other day, this all stems from the prostitution scandal. This has nothing to do with the recent stuff that took down Rick Pitino. All that's still coming down.
That's the scary part.
Okay. Right. So, to me, all right, you're vacating wins and you got all these sanctions. I mean, what happens now on top of it? I mean, could they get the death penalty? I don't know if the NCAA is ever going to revisit the death penalty to a program, but does it result in more losses of scholarships, more sanctions, more financial penalties? This was scandal one. There is a second scandal with the NCAA still hasn't actually penalized Louisville for. So I think there's a lot more here. And then to me, that I think that scandal, I'm curious to see how the NCAA handles it because, from what you read, this is the FBI investigation. Coaches are going to be targeted, and we're talking about destroying coaching legacies and all that. And that's fine and great. But I think something you have to realize is, this is part of the system. Coaches are operating, and I'm not giving them a free pass, but they're operating within the infrastructure. If you have to do certain things to get players because street agents and sneaker companies have all the power, you may need to look higher up the food chain. How complicit was the NCAA? How much did Mark Emmert know about this? I almost look at it as a drug sting where if you want to target the coaches, okay, these are the guys who are just playing by the rules of a broken system. And so who are you really getting? Are you getting, mid-level drug dealers here, so to speak? You're not getting the top guys. You're not changing the infrastructure. You're not changing the system. You really want to rehab this whole thing. You really want to change things. I think you need to go higher up the food chain. Coaches may be the most recognizable names. They may be the biggest names, but I don't think they're that high up on the food chain for, the so-called corruption that the FBI is looking into.
Anish Shroff, studio host, anchor, and play-by-play broadcaster at ESPN. We really appreciate the time this morning. Thanks so much for coming on the show. Let's do this again soon. This was fun.
You got it. Take care.
Pleasure.